I'm Matthew Kerbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. All right, for an episode of Law Subscribed Live, Nicole Loughlin, welcome to the episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, Nicole, you and I have had a chance to already have a great conversation. And I thought it made a heck of a lot of sense that even though you may not be leveraging subscription model like some of my guests, you've managed to ditch the billable hour and you're doing it in an estate planning and probate practice. And so just other than that, tell my listeners who maybe haven't come across your stuff yet, a little bit about yourself and what brought you to starting your own practice.
Well, I started my own practice in 2018. I'm a mom of three. At the time, I had my second child. And I worked for somebody who had a small law firm. He had told me his retirement plan very early on when I started working for him. And so I kind of always knew the trajectory was going to be at some point, I was going to be going out on my own. And I was very happy to do that as a mom of a toddler. I was able to, work from home, which I do. It's actually today is take your kids to work day. So I have two elementary school kids home with me today, and I have a 3-year-old. So really starting my firm was for them. I wanted to have flexibility. I wanted to be able to build my own schedule, make it to school events, and I've been successful and able to do that. Even as I've gotten a lot busier, I'm still able to, with some time and some planning, build out a schedule that works for my family, take vacations, things like that. In terms of my practice areas, I had done quite a few things. It was a civil practice where I started. I did a lot of personal injury work. I worked a lot with estate planning, and I did some probate at that time. And so when I opened my firm, I wanted to pick the practice areas where I had the happiest clients. And that was estate planning and probate. With estate planning, one of the upsides and the downsides is oftentimes people don't feel urgency. Sometimes they do, obviously, if they're in crisis and they're coming to us and it's urgent. But in most cases, people are hiring us because they want to. They see the value in the work that we're doing and the services that we provide. And so they are happy clients. People who need assistance navigating the probate process here in Florida hire us because they're in a situation where they're vulnerable. They have lost a loved one. They know they need to get through this transactional portion, and they want somebody to kind of hold their hand through that process. And so we do a really good job of that. I still practice personal injury. Litigation is really not something that I love. So most of that work for me is pre-suit, and I co-counsel with some of the best trial attorneys in the state if I have cases that are in that direction.
Yeah. And so in the personal injury world, it's contingency, presumably, is how you make money there, right?
Correct.
And then before you had your own practice, like, did you have to track time? Were you billing hours? Like, what was your experience with that like?
So I had a negative experience billing hours on one of my first big probate cases. And we did bill hourly at the firm. So I was trained to do that. And I was very diligent about being just on the dot with my hours, clocking in on the dot, clocking out on the dot, saying my exact time. I was very good at that because I'm a perfectionist, like many lawyers are. So I had a case where there were a lot of beneficiaries. They were spread out all over the world, and I was really working the case by myself. Even though I had a senior attorney overseeing the work, I was doing the work, which meant that I was doing a lot of the admin work, a lot of the paralegal work. I was preparing letters and not just reviewing them, right? I was preparing pleadings, not just reviewing them. So when you have a firm and you have help, which I do now, you have maybe an assistant, a legal assistant, or a paralegal prep the file for you, and the attorney is just reviewing. But at the time, I was doing it all, and I billed that way. And probate in Florida, there is a presumed reasonable statutory fee schedule, and it's 3% up to $1 million. In this case was about that, about $1 million. So 3% would have been $30,000 fee, which is a great fee. But the hourly ended up being more than that, right? Having so many beneficiaries out of the country, having to coordinate with them, sending things back and forth. There were two ancillary probates in different jurisdictions. It was a lot of work. So we billed for extraordinary fees, and it was challenged. And I had never had my fees challenged before because I was very honest about my billing, but I had to take the stand and go through a very uncomfortable fee dispute. And that was a huge turning point for me, and something that stuck with me forever was I don't want to have to do that again. I don't want to have to justify the time that I actually literally spent on a file or have somebody accuse me of being dishonest, which I'm not. So the judge actually was very complimentary toward me. When, really ultimately the person who, stood to lose the most was my employer, and he was very complimentary about how I handled it and the testimony I gave. In fact, he called my husband that day and left a message and said I had just gone through probably, one of the most difficult days in court I've had to go through, but I did a tremendous job, and he was very proud of me. And so my husband saved that voicemail actually for me. And it was very sweet. And the judge was very complimentary, but I didn't get all the fees, or the firm didn't get all the fees. And so I never wanted to have to do that again. I think that was back in my subconscious mind, right? Because after that, I still worked at that firm. I still had to bill hourly. So, it was just, part of it, part of life. But when I opened my own firm, I knew that I wasn't going to do that. The statutory fee was going to be fine for me. I was going to focus more on probate anyway. And so what I did was a sort of hybrid approach to say there's a minimum flat fee that we're going to take on any probate case. If it's a small estate, even if it's a larger estate, but it's exempt assets, we're always going to take this flat fee. If it's a larger estate, then it's going to be sort of a sliding scale, and we're going to revert to that statutory schedule. And it's very predictable because the clients who come to me know what's in the estate. And so they know if it's going to be a small estate or if it's going to be a large estate, and we can predict what the fees are going to be from the outset. Now, when I have somebody who has a small estate and I say, look, it's going to be this minimum fee, there's no other assets, this is the fee. But if you find an account that has $1 million in it, then we're going to revert to this sliding scale. And I don't think you're going to be disappointed, right? Because you'll have found the account, but we're going to change the fee structure at that time. And so clients really like that. And there's no surprises. There's no sticker shock. I've had sticker shock myself hiring attorneys where they said, I'm very cognizant of the time that I spent and, this and that. And then you get the bill and you're like, oh my gosh, that's not what I expected. So that predictability, I think, goes a really long way for clients.
Absolutely. And I'm curious about your perspective of the hybrid model that you said, because if you do switch to that sliding scale up to the cap of the 3%, up to $1 million, does that become hourly, or does that just go up to that fixed rate of the 3% of whatever it is up to $1 million?
So it's presumed reasonable. So we really don't have to justify the time, right? Now, in my agreement, I put in there a disclaimer that we're supposed to put in there that this isn't, you don't have to agree to this. You could agree to a different arrangement, but in my firm, this is how we do it. So even though I think my business coach would like me to be tracking my time on everything and have those records, we can always, because we're saving everything that we do, all the conversations that we have, all of the emails are attached to the file, we could always create those timesheets if we needed to very accurately, but we're not tracking our time. It's just not what I want to do in my firm. I do not want to be, I don't want to be a slave to the billable hour.
Yeah. Yeah. And of the almost around like 60 or so lawyers I've had on the podcast, right? Because I also interview a lot of non-attorneys in this space, but like that's a through line, right? Tracking time, we don't want to do it. It doesn't make sense. We've had disputes with clients. I think you're the first guest I've had who's actually had to take the stand, though, related to those billing disputes, right? And for me, I think about, well, like time equaling money is one thing if you're billing by the hour, but does it equal value? right? And at least, and I don't know what was in the client's head during that fee dispute, but what I think about is because it's harder to conceive of, well, how long did this thing take and is there value there for the lawyer and for the client? Like perceiving that as value is a question, right? And if the judge ultimately didn't award the firm the full fee for the time spent, it does beg the question of what is the value the client is paying for. And the fact that, and I don't think you actually said it, which state are you in? Which jurisdiction?
I'm in Florida.
In Florida, right. So the fact that Florida has a presumed reasonable fee for probate cases of up to 3% with or without tracking time is pretty incredible, right? Because every jurisdiction's different. And even every practice area is different, right? And so that you can have up to that sliding scale of a fixed amount based on a percentage. So it's like kind of like a contingency sort of a deal, but it's still like a known fee. And at least the state has said, or the governing body, whoever regulates lawyers in Florida, has said, that this is a reasonable fee. That's kind of great.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I'm not saying that that a request for timesheets couldn't come in. It certainly could, which is why the work is there,
Yeah.
right? But we're not providing a breakdown of the fees and saying this is the value you've received, because the value is in the result, right? If we get something done faster, that's great. I always tell clients, like, our goal is not to take in the fee and sit on the case until you call us and say, hey, what's the status? Our goal is to be so far ahead of you that you know the status before you're even thinking, what's the status, right? So I know that sometimes law firms work. They're really good at taking in retainers, taking in the money, getting the clients in the door, and then the cases don't necessarily get worked until there's a check-in, right? And then it's like, okay, drop everything and let's produce something for this file so that we can justify, right? So I want to be always ahead. I want to surprise my clients with the efficiency so that they know, like, yeah, I paid a flat fee, and so far everything is going really smooth, right? I don't have to check in. I'm not worried about how much time they're spending. I can call, I can email. Everybody's super responsive. So it's just like a really freeing experience, I think, especially for people who have had the opposite experience, right? They've had an experience with, these family law, for example. I know there are some people that have like nailed it on flat fees for family law, and others that they have to charge hourly. And people are traumatized by that a little bit.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
afraid to call their lawyer. They're afraid to work with their lawyer, right? And like I want to pull on that thread of what you said is you want to surprise them with the efficiency. And I think that's so important because when you stop billing by the hour, suddenly efficiency actually matters more because getting things like you said to your client faster is actually more valuable, right? It's the inverse relationship with time and money. The less time spent, the more valuable it is for the client and the more money you make as the attorney. And like talk about aligning incentives, right? Like what has been your experience with that? And then like what standard operating procedures, what technology have you been adopting to make sure that that continues to go in the right direction?
That's so important to me. Actually, when I was pregnant with my third child, automating my law firm became a huge motivation. I mean, I was so determined in that 9 months to ensure that I had just a seamless procedure. And so I automated pretty much start to finish everything on the intake side to make the experience very uniform and predictable for leads coming in. Everybody who came in went through the same intake process, right? So we can now track the stats of the firm, and we're not tracking based on, well, I was feeling, this way that day, or I answered the phone quicker that day, or I got to my emails. No, there's a process in place. One of the things that I've done is I have hired a lot of part-time assistants and even attorneys in my firm who are just very efficient at the job they have at the firm. So I have one assistant that is just dedicated to 4 to 5 hours a day working with leads, getting them scheduled, making sure they've completed questionnaires, making sure that they have a smooth onboarding experience, and then also working with past clients offboarding to make sure that they had a good experience at the firm, to make sure they have no more questions for the attorney before we close the file, and to ask for reviews if they are so inclined. And then I have an assistant who spends all of her time working with our existing clients. Well, I found the existing clients prefer to call her than to call me. She's always available. She's always friendly. She can always get an answer. She could probably get an answer from me quicker than they can get on the phone with me because my day is often very scheduled. And so my assistant can chat me and say, somebody wants an answer and I could give that to her. So having somebody who's just dedicated to working with our existing clients is really important and make sure everybody's happy. So her job is really to make sure that the files are moving forward and smooth. We use a Kanban board view of our case files and our leads. I use Lawcus, big fan of Lawcus, and you find me saying that in other places on the internet. I love them. And so we can see where our clients are at a glance. I know who's in draft, who's in review, who is in awaiting court orders, who is in an inventory creditor period, distribution, whatever. I can see, and by looking at that, I can see where's the work for me to do. And then my assistant can see where can I follow up with clients, right? If clients have been sitting on drafts for several weeks and we've been emailing them and checking it and we're not hearing anything, she knows to pick up the phone and call them. But I find estate planning, and just to switch over to estate planning, because we're flat fee there too, a lot of times people really drag their feet through that process. Some kind of mind block when we're going through estate planning that people start the process, but it's hard to get to the finish line. So when we draft documents and we upload them to the client portal, I also schedule follow-up emails to go out every single week for 2 months. They get a follow-up email from me if they're still in review that says, have you reviewed your drafts? Do you have any questions? Do you want to schedule an appointment? Do you want revisions? All of these things every single week. So by a month, 2 months down the road, if we haven't heard from them and my assistant is calling, it's not the client saying, we're waiting on you for something. The client's apologizing for making us wait on them. It's like the opposite. And that's the goal, for me, is to say that they want to speed up to meet our expectations because we're so efficient, right? I had a client yesterday saying, thank you so much for your patience. And I'm thinking, you already paid me in full. I already did the work. Like, I'm patient because I can be, right? It's up to you, but I'm not going to stop checking in with you until I get you to the finish line.
Yeah, for those who are watching this live, you're only able to see Nicole while she's talking, and the podcast viewers later on get to see my reactions. But I'm just smiling and nodding along as Nicole is talking to everything. And when you mentioned Lawcus, I remember you mentioned on our last call, and I looked it up, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember them. Like, I think I met them a couple of years ago at Startup Alley at ABA Tech Show when they were back in the Startup Alley phase of their journey. And so that to hear that you were having good success with them. I remember they seemed really interesting to me. Now, I have a subscription-based practice, of course, and so they weren't necessarily designed for that, but I do know they were talking about how fixed fee lawyers were using their platform, and really subscription in a lot of ways is just a recurring fixed fee for the scope of what you get for that scope time frame, a month, a quarter, a year, whatever. So I got to say, I am Lawcus curious, if I could kind of rhyme that there a little bit. And so what I didn't know, though, is Kanban boards was part of their platform. And so that's like a built into their practice management is the Kanban boarding?
Yeah, what I love about Lawcus, and I was an early adopter back in 2021, really probably end of 2020, is that it's Kanban board view for both lead management and case management. So there's a section where you can see your leads before they're converted to matters, and you can see that in a Kanban board view. So you can see prospect, you break it down however you want. But for me, it's like prospect, initial consultation, signed agreement, follow up. And then there's some stages in there that we built in for like not qualified. Maybe we're holding for some reason. Maybe they didn't show up to a meeting. And so we moved them to another section where we're just going to trying to follow up with them from there, but maybe not as urgently because they had a meeting and they didn't make it. So the the thing that I learned with that is that what and how it differs from like other CRMs is like I use ActiveCampaign as well. In my ActiveCampaign list, let's say there's like, I don't know, 10,000 people on that list, which I think is probably accurate based on my what I pay for that. I'm not looking at those all as hot leads, right? Some of those are referral partners, people who have maybe engaged in some way, like they downloaded something or they attended a webinar, but they didn't take that next step to call us. So we're not looking at that list of thousands of people as like we need to call them and get them scheduled, right? But when somebody takes that first step and they call our law firm and they're showing interest, right? Or they've emailed us and they're showing some interest, that's when we put them into the lead management section of Lawcus to say, okay, this is now a prospect. They have taken some extraordinary action to like get on the calendar. So let's keep following up with them. And what I learned is that I was getting a lot more leads and my conversion rate wasn't quite as good as I thought it was because I wasn't tracking that. I was just tracking because mentally we do this. It seems like I convert most of the clients that I meet with, right? Or you don't think you got as many leads as you got because maybe they weren't qualified, right? So it really was eye-opening to start tracking all of that and see, that list grow to say, okay, look at all of this sort of these dormant leads, right? These are people that really wanted our services, but they haven't moved forward. So having it all like in that Kanban board view makes it really easy for us to follow up with people. Obviously, we're going to spend more of our attention on the people who are scheduling appointments and attended an appointment, but there's always like this backlog of, okay, who can we follow up with to see if we can either get them back on the schedule or get them to engage. And then on the other side of the matter management, you can have different pipelines for different practice areas. So I have one for estate planning, one for probate, one for personal injury. I have some test pipelines that I can test things out on. And so you can really customize it and your view is, for me, when I think in like buckets, right? I can just see my estate planning clients or just see my probate. And it's not a list where I have to then go and open up a spreadsheet to say, all right, where do I need to take some action? So that, and then the automations. I don't think there's anything out there that does everything that I get with Lawcus at the price point that I get with Lawcus.
So I want to dive into those automations a little bit, but first let's start with the billing of it all. So like, are you able to process, like your bills through there and your client, paying your fee through there? And is like, do you have to integrate with like a Stripe or like an actual payment platform? Like, how does all the billing work?
I have LawPay, and so it's integrated. I know that there are other ways to accept payments that there's, I think, more native integrations with Lawcus that you can do. But for me, it was LawPay. When I first started my practice, I had started with LawPay and I was sort of grandfathered in. And so I just carry that over. But yeah, it's very easy. Integrates with QuickBooks, integrates with LawPay. I invoice straight from Lawcus. I do flat fee invoicing. I can automate my billing for the most part. I still sort of manually go through and finalize it before sending, but based on how I tag the file at the lead stage is what will populate on the invoice and the activity section. The only reason I haven't like fully automated that yet is because there's still enough custom things that I do where like somebody has 3 deeds that they need to do instead of 1 deed. Well, we charge separately for each one and it's I haven't put the time in to build out like those kinds of customizations. But for the most part, when I convert a file, the invoice will populate and I'll see, okay, trust-based plan, deed to trust, the activity category is already built in. I'm not typing things up or, it's just save, send, which is nice.
Let me tell you about the brand new sponsor for Law Subscribed, Paxton. I've been using Paxton as my legal AI tool for over 2 years. I continue to evaluate and demo other legal AI tools in the market and still decide to stick with Paxton because of its reliability, its accuracy, its ease of use, affordability, and they do not lock you into a long-term contract. Now, as a transactional and fractional general counsel attorney, I'm using Paxton for all of my substantive and non-substantive legal work, whether that's legal research, analysis, drafting, or enhancing existing legal work product. In the time it used to take me to draft and analyze legal documents, now, after a little bit of back and forth with Paxton, I have something ready to go in minutes that used to take hours or even days. While I'm no longer a litigator, I could see how valuable Paxton would be when researching a new issue, preparing for a deposition, drafting a motion, or going to trial. So if your firm would benefit from using Paxton as your legal AI tool, then make sure to use the link in the description when signing up to let Paxton know I sent you. That's all about our new sponsor. Now back to the show. Yeah, and I have to imagine with an estate planning practice in particular, having all the plans automated, so you can you when a client comes in through the intake process, they're putting in all this information, well, does that then go and automatically go into the estate planning documents, or is that another form that they fill out that's still automated? But I have to imagine you could automate a lot of that stuff.
You can for sure. There are definitely tools out there that make that really easy. I'm not doing it that way with my questionnaire. My questionnaire helps me to set up the file more in Lawcus rather than going into the drafting software. A lot of law firms that do estate planning use various drafting software. And I have a law clerk and 2 other attorneys, and we use our questionnaire to input into the drafting software, but it doesn't go from the questionnaire to Lawcus to the drafting software. It's something that I explored last year. I won't name the tools, but there are some tools out there that you can use to do that.
You can name the tools. We encourage naming all the tech tools.
Well, but I don't want to give any negative review of them because I didn't end up going with it.
Okay.
But the tools that are very popular that I see a lot of estate planning attorneys use to automate are Decision Vault, and along with their drafting software. And for me, I tested out the drafting softwares that would have integrated with Decision Vault, and I didn't love them. A lot of people love Wealth Counsel, and I didn't love it for my practice. And I put in quite a bit of time into learning it and working with it, and I just decided that I didn't love that. I could go into all the reasons why I didn't love it, but
No, here's the thing, right? It's not going to be for everybody. And I think these companies know that their software is not for everybody, right? Usually pretty quickly after I get some inbound, as I'm sure you get inbound from these, salespeople at these legal tech companies. Oh, try our software. I'll spend a few minutes talking to them, or I'll send them an email about my practice, and they're like, oh, you are not a good fit, right? It's not for everybody. I will say, just because I have to plug my own sponsors, that I do know that Gavel does on the intake. All that information can then go into the estate planning documents. So at least there is a tool out there that allows you to do it. And that's why I was asking about Lawcus, because here's the thing, I could still, just Gavel's a sponsor, sure, but I could talk about other tech tools that do similar things, because just like with ice cream, you might like chocolate, I like vanilla, I'm more of a Heath bar ice cream kind of a person. There's different flavors for different people, right?
100%. And actually, one of the coaching programs that I'm in that's geared toward estate planning attorneys, they promote Gavel as their platform. And I think it really works well for people who have their own forms, who are automating that process. And Lawcus could totally do that. The only thing is, I don't use my own forms. I'm still using drafting software, which I like because it's updated automatically, and it's sort of muscle memory going through it. You know what to do. I know how to check the answer files. I can have somebody pre-fill the answer file for me, and then I go through and check it, make changes. So that's my process. It isn't the most automated compared to some of the other areas of my law firm, but drafting software is in and of itself an automation, right? So that, so we're using that.
And this is what that tells me. That tells me that your profit margins are such that you're profitable enough that you don't need to streamline all the little tiny little pieces that you could have efficiencies. But if you did, it would even super streamline the practice, probably.
Yeah. And also it's kind of exciting because it leaves room for adding things to the practice in the future, right?
Right.
Like right now, like my focus was customer service, making sure. And so, to have good customer service, you have to have an excellent product. And so the work product has to be good, right? And the customer service has to be good. So I focus more on automating the touch points and the customer service side than I have on automating the work product. And so I'm still sort of manually reviewing the work product. But I think that that's, when you're getting this kind of concierge service, you expect that to some degree, right? If it were a service where, it was less customized, that would be the expectation, right? That there wasn't going to be a final review by the attorney to, finalize everything. And so I think that where I'm at is where I need to be, but there's excitement around, some of these tools are going to open up in the next 5 years where I will be able to, streamline further. But right now I don't need to. And like I said, because I have like such targeted staff, I have a law clerk who's licensed in 2 states. She's not client facing, but she's amazing, right? She can go in and, fill out all of the answer files. And then when I go in, I'm reviewing, making sure that I have checked everything, and I'm doing the actual finalizing of the drafts. So that's the part that could be automated. So could I cut out that team member sometime in the future? Maybe, but right now I like having her on, and she's so efficient. She's also a mom of two, and she's got a job, full-time job, and she logs in, you know, once or twice every 2 weeks and, completes that portion of it. And I know it's good because she's an attorney, and then I'm just perfecting it.
Yeah, yeah. So in the last like 15 minutes or so that we have, I want to cover just a couple more topics. So you've brought up the mom thing a couple times. We're going to end with that. But next, after all, this podcast is called Law Subscribed. And so, we talked just briefly about ways that you might be able to integrate subscriptions into your practice and how you might be thinking about that. So if you just want to go ahead and share that with the audience, maybe we have a little bit of back and forth about that.
Yeah, I think that because of my focus has been so much on customer service, a lot of the things that could go into a subscription plan, I kind of threw in as freebies, right? We're doing, after somebody completes a plan, a 6-month check-in. We're doing an annual check-in for everybody. I've automated emails to go out yearly to our past clients with a survey that says, have you had any of these changes in the last year? And if so, maybe you need to schedule an appointment, and then offering up 15 or 30 minutes on my calendar for that. So there's obviously we talked about that's something that I could put in a subscription model to say, hey, here's how we're different, and maybe include some minor revisions, annually, and that would work. I haven't done it yet, but I just brought on a new attorney, kind of a newer attorney, baby attorney, as we like to call them. And so that's taken up some of my, my time, and really wanting to train her well. And so I've been focused more on systems. And so that's kind of my primary focus right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good focus, right? But I do think everybody listening, and I think you'd even agree that when you were explaining all those things that you just do for free for paying clients, like there's value there, right? And like I think capturing that value, even on an annual subscription or a biannual subscription, like every 6 months, for a reasonable price that your clients are willing to pay, I think is a no-brainer, right? Like I really think that there's a lot of value there, and if you price it right, they will pay for it. And it makes me wonder if you're considering having the conversation with the clients, maybe after you've already provided the service, you're not going to charge them for it. Hey, what do you think that was worth? Like having this guaranteed check-in in 6 months after your estate planning was done. I'm thinking about providing some next level service to future clients. And I'm just wondering, would you pay $100 every 6 months for it, $200 a year, $500, $250, every 6 months, or just something like, what was this worth for you? Like how would you describe the value, and what would you be willing to pay for it? And I think lawyers we're afraid to like ask our clients those questions sometimes. But I've heard from guests on the podcast that sometimes their most like the way they were able to achieve their successful pricing for their subscription model was they asked their existing client base, what was this worth to you? Would you pay X amount a month for 12 months? And so like, what do you think about that kind of a thing?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think for me, it's probably, more of my personality is that I love to like surprise people with like the extras. And so I've always thought of it as like if I just wow them at every level, I'm going to be the only person they think of when it comes to the law, and that's always been my thought. But you're right. I think most of the time they are so wowed, like just because I answered the email or I offered the time on my calendar, even if it's my assistant calling and making that offer, they're surprised that is there any charge for this? You know what I mean? Like, what do I owe you for this meeting? And even the free consults, my practice area, we're giving legal advice at the consult level. Everybody who's met with me has walked away with value, with a checklist of things that they can do to protect their family without me. And so even there, like there's opportunity, right? Like I there's room for me to increase the fees that we charge. And I'm also very middle of the road in the fees too. So if people say, well, I haven't shopped around yet or something like that, I'll say, you're welcome to do that, but we're, you know, pretty much spot on, as to where the fees need to be, even though
Right.
I think we could charge more for the value our clients are getting.
Right, right. And even there's room to stratify like your offerings to even open up the potential client base, right? There's like the do it yourself, the done with you, the done for you, kind of like way to do it, especially in the estate planning space.
Yes.
I kind of really want to ask about like more about technology, but I will just point out you're not just about the software. You got the fancy hardware screen in the background going through all your things all on the video call. So I love that. So I'll point that out. Last, I want to talk about the whole mom thing of it all because look, most of the 60 something odd lawyers I've had on the pod, most of them have been women, and while they've not all moms or they're not all talked about being a mother, certainly like there's a through line there, right? Of where the traditional law practice didn't work for women attorneys, right? And so they have gone off and they ditched the billable hour and they've started their own practice and they're, work-life balance, whatever you want to call that, work-life integration, whatever, like finding a way to make it work. And from a personal perspective, me too, right? Like I'm a father of a young child. My kid is like almost 4.5 now. And starting my own practice, in impetus, my wife works a traditional corporate gig. Like I could have the more flexibility between the two of us if I start my own practice to like pick up the kid if she's sick at school, that kind of stuff, right? And being around and being available. So let's talk a little bit more about that and like why the traditional model didn't work for you and why things need to change. And also like why women shouldn't be afraid to, or any lawyer for that matter, like do what you've done.
Yeah, I think that it goes back to law school. I had a professor who was in a big law firm, and she was an adjunct professor, and she had said something like, "I had gotten a divorce, and finally this year, my ex-husband said it finally paid off, right? You're finally making more than me," something like that. And she said, "You know what? You're going to be spending more time with your coworkers than you're going to be spending with your own family." And I don't know, that just stood out to me. And I was like, does it really have to be like, I think this is a millennial mindset because we're kind of like, can't I have both? And I think that a lot of us feel that way, or we sort of like started down that, like, well, why can't I have like a job and a family? And that's where we got that fake work-life balance, thing is like very millennial, right? We want work-life balance, but that's not like really achievable, right? It's just like the bar says you're a lawyer 24/7, but you're also a parent 24/7. You are not going to expect me in my, lawyer suit to not also be a mom, right? If my kid comes in or my kid's homesick from school or we have a global pandemic and everybody's home in the same house for 6 months, right? Like I'm going to be both. And I can't pick and choose one because right now mommy's a lawyer. I can't, take care of you. Now, my kids will say that that's not exactly how it goes, right? I'll say, can you focus on me right now? I definitely, struggle with that transition back and forth, but I'm home. I'm home. I'm with my kids. They can come in. They're allowed to, ask me questions, and I can leave my office and go make a sandwich and come back in. And like on a day like today where the kids are home from school, like it's very fluid, and I'm not scrambling for childcare, and I'm not calling in to explain myself to anybody to say, I'm sorry, I have to be a mom today. It just works. So yeah, the traditional law practice was never appealing to me. When I had that professor, I was like, big law will never work for me. I'm not willing to put in more time with my colleagues than with my family. And so I just knew that that wasn't it. I was very fortunate that I worked for somebody who was family first in my first job, and he had daughters and he understood, family life and being a mom first. And actually, during the years leading up to his retirement, there were times that he didn't want to come down to the office because he was traveling back and forth. And he would say, you just take the baby with you. Just come in with a baby. Like he always said that to me. He's like, I don't have to drive down to Florida or go to that, inspection or attend that hearing. I don't care. Bring the baby. And so at, sort of, I don't know what the word is, but it made it normalized it, right? It normalized parenting at work, which I think is important. So I had my baby at inspections, at mediations. I had my husband take the baby in the car and hold the baby outside of court. And so it just meshing those two worlds has been normal for me from the start.
And that's a really important takeaway because if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, and you are a mother or you want to be a mother, right? You can do that, right? Like you could do that too. If Nicole could do it, you could do that too. And you could start a law firm, and it's scary and it's hard, and the first year is always the toughest, right? But like it's easier than ever to have like to start a law firm than it's ever been in the past.
Yeah, that's true. And also, making your hours. I mean, I could have a consult calendar from 9 to 5, and I could probably fill that calendar with consults every single day. I'm an introvert, so that doesn't work for me. So I have consults from like 10 to 2. And when I had a newborn, that was perfect because that was a napping time, right? And if you've had children, you know that like they start out like it's a lot of work when it's your first one, but also it's kind of like those first 6 months, 4 to 6 months are like pretty easy in terms of like, because they're not mobile. So I would just have, on my Zoom calls, the baby sleeping on my lap. I would nurse. It was all undercover. Every now and then, though, at the 4 month mark, a foot would kick up in the air, and I'd be like, "Uh-oh, somebody sold me out." And I would say, and then, it was a conversation too, right? It softens it, right? When somebody's hiring a probate attorney, they're not looking for, this robotic litigator, right? They're looking for somebody that is heart centric. So that was actually great for me.
Yeah, yeah. They're looking for a whole person. You know, when you're not billing by the hour, you could actually have a conversation with them too, and they could get to know you, and you could get to know them. How about that, huh?
Oh yeah, and I can be myself because I'm chatty, and there was always that worry that if I talked too much, the client would think that I was like manipulating them into like this nice conversation and that I billed them for it.
Right,
You
right.
know? So I can chat freely with people, and I'm not worried, and yeah, they're not getting a bill for like, oh, she was so nice, but she was on the clock the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's wrap it up here. I wanna thank Annette Chody too from Lawquill who introduced us. So thank you, Annette, if you're watching or listening. And
Yeah,
she,
shout out to Annette because she does my SEO.
there you go, right? And she clued me into the whole idea of the LinkedIn newsletter, which I've been leveraging pretty well. So thank you to Annette. The last question I like to ask my guests, Nicole, is just a fun one, and that is a hot dog a sandwich and why?
I've never considered it that, but Yes, I think it is. It's between bread. You can put condiments on it. Yeah, I think it falls under the sandwich category. Yeah.
All right. All right. Good. Good. Way to give some good explanation. Sometimes I have to pull that out of people, but I like it. If folks wanted to reach out, get in touch, follow you, all the places, where's the best way for them to do that?
So my website is www.laughlinlawpa.com, and you can follow me at laughlinlawpa.com. Sorry, I was sick, so I can't say it right, but my own name. But it's LOUGHLINLAWPA.
All right. All right. Great. Well, everybody follow that. Stick around just for another minute or two, Nicole, but we'll sign off now. Nicole Loughlin, thanks again for coming on Law Subscribed Live.
Thanks.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.